There are certain stories that time doesn't erase. This is Hollywood Remembers, a space where we honor the American stars we've recently lost and the global voices that left something behind in all of us. If this kind of remembrance means something to you, your support helps us do it right. Alan Ralph Osmond passed away at 76. And the moment you hear that name, other things come back with it. The matching outfits. The harmonies. Evenings when families sat together in front of the TV without a phone in sight. Word came quietly, without ceremony, just a simple announcement that carried weight. Because Alan wasn't simply a member of the Osmonds. He was the one who held things in place. The older brother. The one behind the coordination, the structure, the unseen work that made the whole thing possible. Long before any of them became household names, when they appeared on the Andy Williams Show in the 1960s, there was something different about them. Something that felt less like performance and more like truth, brothers making music because it was theirs, not because fame had called yet. Then the 70s came rushing in. Suddenly the Osmonds were inescapable. One bad apple on every radio, packed venues, screaming crowds. But Alan was never really chasing that. He was managing it. Holding the center while everything spun around it. When his health eventually forced him to slow down, he stepped back without drama, without public grievance. Family came first. It always had. Some people never stand at the front, but take them away and everything shifts. That's what this news feels like. Not devastating, but still. A particular quiet. Like a song you forgot existed, and then you hear 2 bars of it, and somehow you know every single word. Gene Michael Ozzy Osbourne has died at 76. And saying it out loud takes a second to land. Ozzy. Gone. The news arrived plainly, without theatrics, which felt strange for a man whose entire life seemed built around them. But that's fitting too, in its own way. For those who were there in the early 1970s, Black Sabbath didn't sound like anything that had come before. It wasn't radio-friendly. It wasn't polished. Songs like Paranoid and Iron Man had weight, texture, a kind of darkness that didn't ask permission. Ozzy's voice wasn't trained or refined, it was raw and unsettling and completely his own. You didn't need to understand heavy metal to feel it. It reached you anyway. They gave him the nickname Prince of Darkness, and he wore it with the ease of someone who'd never tried to be anything else. Yes, there were controversies. There were years of chaos and headlines and decisions that made people wince. But that was never the whole picture. Because behind it all was someone who kept showing up, through the 80s, through solo records that shouldn't have worked but did, through years that weren't gentle. Then came the Osbournes in the early 2000s, and something shifted. Audiences didn't just see the legend anymore. They saw the father who couldn't work the TV remote. The husband. The person. Confused and funny and disarmingly real in a way most celebrities never allow themselves to be. He never fit into any particular mold. He never really tried. And maybe that's exactly why this lands differently. Because Ozzy wasn't just music history, he was part of the texture of life itself. The loud, chaotic, imperfect version of it. The silence now isn't empty. It's just changed. He wasn't born with a stage name or a destiny. Back then he was Gordon Matthew Sumner, a boy from Wallsend in northeastern England, born October 2, 1951. A shipbuilding town. Heavy skies. The kind of place where the weight of expectation settles on you before you're old enough to name it. His father worked relentlessly. His mother, a hairdresser, filled the house with small stories about people, their lives, their problems, their small victories. He listened. He watched. He filed things away. As a teenager, he'd sit near the window and stare at the shipyards, massive steel frames rising against gray skies, and teach himself guitar, reaching for something he couldn't yet describe. School didn't suit him. Neither did the path everyone else seemed to follow without question. He drifted. Worked as a bus conductor for a while, then as a teacher, English and music, trying to be responsible, trying to build a life that made practical sense. But at night, the pull was always there. Small jazz gigs. A bass guitar that gradually stopped being a pastime and became something he needed. Not for income. For air. The nickname Sting came from a striped yellow and black sweater and an offhand joke that somehow stuck. Strange how a throwaway moment like that becomes the name the whole world eventually knows. He wasn't chasing fame yet. He was chasing a feeling, the specific silence that settles in a room when a piece of music gets something exactly right. He just hadn't found where he belonged yet. That changed slowly. Nothing about his ascent was dramatic or sudden. By the mid-1970s he'd crossed paths with two other musicians who also didn't quite fit anywhere, Stuart Copeland and Andy Summers. Different in almost every way, but something between them worked. They called themselves the Police. Early gigs were small and unglamorous, sticky floors, thin crowds, long drives running on almost no sleep. Most people would have quit. He didn't. There was something in his voice even then. Not just the quality of it, but the control, the way he could hold emotion just below the surface, keeping it in check long enough to draw you closer. Roxanne, released in 1978, didn't hit immediately. It seeped in. Found people gradually, the way honest things tend to. By the early 1980s, everything had scaled up, arenas, floodlights, the weight of global expectations. Every Breath You Take in 1983 became one of those songs people think they understand on first listen, and then slowly realize they don't. There was always something underneath with him. But success cost something. Tension had been building inside the band for years, creative friction, conflicting visions, silences during rehearsals that communicated more than arguments ever could. By 1984, even at the height of everything, the band was already pulling apart. And then he made a choice that surprised people, he walked away. Not because it had failed, but because he needed room to breathe again. His 1985 solo debut, The Dream of the Blue Turtles, leaned into jazz, risky, unconventional, the opposite of the safe move. It worked anyway. Still, doubt followed. Was he building something new or leaving something important behind? He didn't have a clean answer yet. The late 1980s and 1990s found him quieter in some ways, more deliberate. No longer just a voice on the radio, but a presence with genuine artistic weight. Nothing like The Sun in 1987 carried personal grief openly, the loss of his mother was something he didn't conceal. You could hear it in the spaces between words. He never chased trends or tried to sound current. While others scrambled to stay relevant, he moved sideways, brought jazz sensibilities into pop arrangements, wrote songs that didn't demand attention but held it anyway. Critics weren't always kind. Too cerebral, some said. Too cold, too unwilling to repeat his own successes. That kind of sustained skepticism doesn't just slide off. It lingers. But he kept evolving. Into the 2000s, he explored Renaissance lute music, not exactly the expected pivot for a global rock figure. But that was always the point. He was never interested in meeting expectations. Only in staying honest. His relationship with Trudy Styler, which began in the early 1980s, brought its share of public scrutiny. But they built something lasting, a family, a life. Time, of course, takes its toll on everyone, and his voice has shifted with age, the physical demands of decades on stage leaving their mark. He adapted, learning to work with what remained rather than mourning what had changed. And in that process, something else became visible, not just the performer, but the presence underneath. Today, Sting still performs. Not to prove anything. Not to compete. But to connect with the people who didn't just hear his music, who lived alongside it through different chapters of their own lives. There's a steadiness to him now. An acceptance that isn't resignation, just clarity. And if you watch closely enough, you can still see it, that search. Not for fame, not for approval, just for meaning. His voice still reaches people because it hasn't finished arriving yet. William Patrick Muldoon III has died at 57. There's no way to soften that. Too soon is the only honest response. For a lot of people, he'll be remembered most as Patrick Muldoon, a face tied to a specific era of television, when a well-crafted character was enough to keep you watching every week. The news arrived the way these things sometimes do, without build-up, just a headline that makes you stop and read it twice to make sure. In the 1990s, Muldoon had a presence that felt lived in rather than performed. Days of Our Lives brought him into millions of homes on a daily basis. Later, Starship Troopers gave him a different kind of platform, broader, louder, but that same grounded quality came through. He never seemed to be reaching for something larger than the work itself. He also had music, which people sometimes overlook. It wasn't a side project he dabbled in for attention. It was something he genuinely cared about, and that kind of quiet commitment says something real about a person. Off-screen, by most accounts, he showed up, did the work, and didn't manufacture a persona around it. There are certain faces you don't think about for years, and then they surface, clear as ever, and you realize they've been part of the furniture of your memory all along. Hearing that he's gone doesn't feel tragic in a loud way. It feels like an interruption. A story that was still moving forward, still unfolding. And maybe what lingers most isn't just what he accomplished, but the sense that there was still more of it left to come. Melba Joyce Montgomery has died at 86. For anyone who grew up with country music the way it used to be, unpolished, emotionally honest, a little worn around the edges, her voice was part of that world. The news was confirmed without fanfare, a quiet passing that felt consistent with who she was. In the 1960s and into the early 70s, when country duets still carried genuine feeling rather than production sheen, Melba stood alongside names like George Jones and Gene Pitney. Those recordings weren't engineered for perfection. They sounded like something that had been through something. You could feel the weight of the story in every line. And she never tried to dominate a song. She gave it room. Then came 1974, and No Charge. A simple song, really, a mother itemizing everything she's given, asking for nothing back. It touched something people weren't prepared to feel. It topped the charts. But more than that, it stayed. Decades later, it still does. There was a softness to Melba that was never weakness. It was more like conviction that didn't need to be loud to be felt. She didn't go looking for the spotlight. The music found its audience on its own. And maybe that's why this news settles the way it does, not with a sharp ache, but with a slow, spreading recognition that a voice you didn't hear every day was somehow always there, exactly when it mattered.